There isn't a more quintessential form of relaxation than sinking in the couch, feet on the table, watching TV. After all, what better way to take your mind off the job you just left a few hours ago? Unless of course that TV show is The Office. This legendary show flipped the TV as a distraction from your life paradigm by setting the action in precisely the type of workplace many people long to escape. The gambit worked brilliantly and proved that a weekly television show could be the perfect medium to tell stories about contemporary work culture. Set in Scranton, Pennsylvania, in the sales office of a nearly obsolete paper company, the show's characters at first didn't develop as much as stagnate. Like their dead-end jobs and their dead-end lives, these people were just passing time, one prolonged meeting at a time. Just as reality television suits the viewer's inner narcissist by telling stories of even more narcissistic people, The Office made its audience feel better about their professional lives by showcasing a workplace with even drabber decor and more grating co-workers. With one gigantic difference: the light in the darkness. Michael Gary Scott. Steve Carell's greatest role, that of Michael Scott, was filled with such complexity. On the surface, the regional manager of Scranton's Dunder Mifflin Paper Company was a two-dimensional imbecile, racist, chauvinistic, and culturally tactless. Michael hits an employee with his car, forcibly kisses an employee to prove he's not homophobic, and thinks Wikipedia is a reliable source of information. Well, we're all guilty of that one. He's always reminding Stanley that he's black, Oscar that he's Mexican, and Kelly that she's Indian. He doesn't mock his employees for their race necessarily, his cultural ignorance is rarely malicious.
I'm Prison Mike!
Rather, he simply makes them aware, in variably cruel and non-subtle ways, of their implied otherness.
Now she knows what it's like to be a minority!
Michael is also sexist. He doesn't know much about women, but he certainly thinks their looks to be deserving of intense scrutiny. When Pam wears glasses, he's quick to let her know how ugly she looks. When Michael breaks up with his girlfriend Jan, she gets breast implants, and he decides to take her back. Michael makes fun of the office's women on the daily, zeroing in with derogatory remarks, especially via hurtful statements aimed towards Phyllis and Meredith. Lots of what he says to Pam borders dangerously on sexual harassment.
If you think she's cute now, you should have seen her a couple of years ago.
What?
So this gets better with time. In fact, his relationship with Pam transitions slowly into one of paternal affection, and he develops a similar relationship with Aaron. Throughout the history of American sitcoms, there are few precedents for this kind of smart but obtuse, aggressive but sentimental, trying to be hip but succeeding at being lovable employer that Carell Scott became. Early sitcoms were family-centered. Bosses tended to be a minor role, either pompous but endearing, Bewitch's Larry Tate say, or pompous and largely unseen. The Dick Van Dyke Show's Alan Brady. Indeed, most sitcoms have centered around employees, not bosses, because it's been commonly thought that most Americans can relate to management as well as they can to people who work for management. So in retrospect, what Carell and The Office producers, led by Greg Daniels, did was slow, steady, and remarkable. They train us to look at Michael skeptically at first, from two points of view, that of the omniscient camera crew that is filming the Scranton office, and that of Jim Halpert, who was positioned early on as the guy we were meant to identify with. The only one in the office who consistently thought Michael had a screw loose but wanted to stick around to watch what happened. And then once we accepted Michael as the lead eccentric in an office full of eccentrics, the series set about making him more fully rounded, filling us in on his pop culture obsessions, from a deep love and understanding of Die Hard to a deep love and misunderstanding of pop music, particularly hip-hop. The Office earned the affection it wanted us to feel for Michael, and then went on to do what would have been unthinkable with the Ricky Gervais Office. We could at times, at crucial moments, identify with Michael. The few times when Michael would get choked up in an episode, I admit I got a little choked up too, and felt glad that I had. The greatness of what Carell did with the character handed to him by Ricky Gervais was to make him a vulnerable, insecure, highly suggestible man who takes his cues from pop culture and the people around him, but who fundamentally believes he's doing the right thing even when those around him think he's wrong.
It's not that he is intrinsically racist or homophobic or sexist. He just doesn't have a frame of reference. The way I feel about the character is that he has a decent heart, he's a decent person, and he's just trying his best.
Before The Office, Carell was featured primarily as a correspondent for The Daily Show, whose segments hinge on him humorously misunderstanding the assignments given to him by Jon Stewart, and subsequently getting testy when called on it. At the time, people couldn't fathom how such a perfect chunk of television was going to become an American sitcom hoping to amass enough episodes to go into syndication. Of course, it was inevitable people would feel this way when something popular was just going to be remade and Americanized. Most of the pressure, of course, would fall into the man who would fill Ricky Gervais' giant shoes in the reinterpretation of the iconic David Brent. Carell had to reinterpret Michael Scott as someone who could survive over the long haul. He couldn't be as petty or self-destructive as Gervais' creation had been. Gervais' boss was a short-fused time bomb, whereas Carell had to go more stealth.
Would I rather be feared or loved? Easy, both. I want people to be afraid of how much they love me.
Michael says this exposing a fundamental need he has, to be liked. Although he never stops making jokes, beneath it all, Michael is supremely tormented by loneliness. He tries to connect with people in the best way he knows how, but usually fails. When he buys a new phone plan and is allowed unlimited calls to his top 5 friends, he doesn't even have 5 friends to add. In a particularly affecting Season 2 moment, Michael recalls the many Halloween costumes he's worn to work over the years, talking about how much he loves dressing up at the office. But afterwards, the camera follows Michael home to an empty house, where we see him handing out Halloween candy to trick-or-treaters by himself. The juxtaposition between the brave face Michael puts on at work and his solitary home life often serves as an emotional gut punch. We know why he doesn't have anyone, he's hardly an appealing prospect, but he's still a human being, and it is a little heartbreaking to watch someone who craves human contact be continually denied.
What is so wrong about me? I'm caring. I'm generous. I'm sensual. Is it really so horrible that I could possibly go out and find happiness?
This is the essence of what makes the character so likable. The undeniable honesty the character demonstrates. A man in a boring job nobody will like. It's why he tries desperately to make the office seem like a family, to hide the fact that it's such a stagnating, life-sucking job with no way out. Hide the fact that the characters are stuck in a kind of purgatory for years on end, longing for something different but never finding it. And he succeeds. Michael Scott makes life just a little more bearable for the people working there, like Escape might walk in the door at any second, until Michael Scott left. Office works suck. This is the original theme explored by the show, and it only works if the characters never grow. What made the early parts of the show so dryly funny and morbidly relatable was that the seasons and names of the meetings changed, but the paper pushing remained the same. Just another cog in the wheel syndrome only hits home if the wheel spins indefinitely and the cogs stay put. But the writers can only use constructed bonding experiences, like an awkward sexual harassment training session or an impromptu office Olympics, so many times to illustrate the lengths to which white-collar drones will go to survive another excruciating day. That's why the original British show works so well. It has the perfect length and it magnificently illustrates the point of the show. The original Office showed fulfillment as a cruel joke. Tim finally ended up with Dawn at the end of the show, but he was still stuck at Warnham Hogg, selling paper, something he did not want to do. When that office ends, there are no suggestions that Tim might find some other better job. In his closing monologue to the whole series, Tim invites the unseen documentarians to come back in 10 years to Warnham Hogg and check up on him. He's got the girl, but the show is under no illusions that this makes everything else better. But in television, especially in American long-duration shows, things have to change. So The Office's characters developed, and their individual stories gradually outshone the show's focus on survival in a corporate setting. By season 5, the show was struggling to transition from a narrative about a listless workplace to a comedy that just happened to be set in an office. The show, however, still managed to make this work, albeit not as well as it did in the past, mainly because of Michael Scott. In the chaos that became later seasons, Michael Scott functioned as an anchor for the entire show, reining in the increased unbelievability the scenarios instilled. The scenarios never felt too artificial, mean-spirited, or out of character because it made sense with who Michael Scott was. We know he can be petty, obsessed with being liked to a fault, and insensitive to his co-workers' feelings. So when he puts the cast in outrageous scenarios, we know exactly where it comes from a genuine place of trying to make the office a better place for him and his co-workers, even if it is completely misguided. He not only made the premise of the comedy, but he also brought it out of everyone else. The worst part of this was how the show treated the rest of the cast. Primarily Andy Bernard was supposed to be a substitute. The show tried to remain the same while trying to transform Andy into a discount Michael Scott. It didn't work at all. It negated all the growth the character experienced in the previous seasons. it felt grossly out of character and made the episodes look forced and mean-spirited. It didn't feel like the conflict came naturally from the characters, but that the writers were forcing them to happen even if they didn't make sense. Andy stopped being a character like he was before and became whatever the writers needed him to be for any episode. He became a prop. It got so bad they had to devote entire episodes to having everyone in the office basically spend half an hour telling us that Andy was a great manager and that we really should love him. Because at that point the character had become so empty it was impossible to just show it. The storylines were too absurd to accept as a legitimate character development, yet not funny enough to make it worth pushing the reality of the show to an ever more extreme degree. For 7 years, The Office trailed a deluded man who fancied himself courageous and intelligent. What Michael doesn't realize, perhaps until meeting Holly, is that he's not a genius. He isn't even especially talented. Michael finally gets that he doesn't need to be the bravest, smartest, or best salesman in the world in order to be worth something.
What a great boss you turned out to be. Best boss I ever had.
He cares about people and he never stops dreaming, whether it be of finding true love or paying for the education of a bunch of teenagers. That is good enough.